modernist poetry to music in 2007 at King's College London. And her dissertation was awarded the Hellenic Foundation Award in 2007 and is published in 2011 by Domos in Greek. And in 2010-11, she was a visiting lecturer at the University of Cyprus. Her research interest, as you may have understood from her, the title of her dissertation, include literary representations of music and soundscapes and the relationship of poetry to music. And today she will give a paper on Crete in Kazantzakis' Zorba the Greek, music and identity. Polina.
Thank you. In the vast bibliography on Nikos Kazantzakis' novel Βίος και Πολιτεία του Alexis Zorba, or Zorba the Greek according to its English title, the themes of identity, music and dance are central. This is so not only because of the novel, which was written by Kazantzakis between 1941 and 1943 and was first published in 1946 to become his first great success. There is, of course, also Michael Kakoyannis' 1964 film, based on the novel and bearing the same English title, Zorba the Greek, with the famous music by Mikis Theodorakis, above all the iconic Sirtaki dance that closes it. In my talk, I will revisit these themes, focusing on the Cretan identity of the boss, a writer, Kalamaras, who is the narrator of the novel, vis-à-vis the figure of Alexis Zorbas, a roguish workman with an idiosyncratic wisdom and morality, for whom playing music, singing and dancing are the highest forms of expression. I will look mainly at the novel, also comparing it with Kazantzakis' autobiographical report to Greco, in which Kazantzakis returns, almost 15 years after Zorba the Greek, to the figure of Alexis Zorbas. I will refer to the film only in passing. It is a commonplace that the narrator of Zorba the Greek, that is the boss, shares many aspects with the narrator of the report to Greco, that is, roughly speaking, Kazantzakis himself. And it is also commonplace that both narratives provide their own versions of the friendship and collaboration between Kazantzakis and the real Zorbas, which are both temporally and spatially distorted in relation to what really happened. It is well known, for example, that in 1917, Kazantzakis collaborated with Georgis Zorbas and not Alexis Zorbas in a mining venture in Prastova in Mani in the Peloponnese. This mining venture would constitute the setting of Zorba the Greek and appear again in the report to Greco. But in both cases, it would be located not in Mani in the Peloponnese, but in Crete, and be described as the only collaboration between the two men. But Georgis Zorbas also took part in 1919 in the mission of repatriating Greek populations from the Caucasus, led by Kazantzakis, then Director General of the Ministry of Welfare. In Zorba the Greek, the Caucasus mission starts before the mining venture and runs parallel with it, with neither the narrator boss nor Alexis Zorbas taking part in it. The events in the Caucasus are related only to the narrator boss's friend Stavridakis. In Zorba the Greek, details about the origin of Alexis Zorbas on the one hand, and that of the narrator boss, but also his friend Stavridakis on the other, are treated in a totally different way. Already in the prologue to the novel, we are told that Zorbas comes from a village on the Mount Olympus. This piece of information is repeated immediately afterwards in the first chapter of the novel, which describes the first encounter by chance between Zorbas and the narrator boss in a cafe in Piraeus, as the latter is ready to depart for Crete and his mining venture. There, Zorba's native Macedonian village, and we must keep in mind that when Kazantzakis' novel was published in English, the meaning or connotations of the name Macedonia were different from today's. the native Macedonian village of Zorbas is further linked with his Santuri, an eastern dulcimer. We learn that Zorbas first heard and fell in love with the Santuri in his village at the age of 20. He is now 65 in the story, and was taught how to play it by a Turkish musician in Salonika. In the first encounter between the narrator boss and Zorbas in Piraeus, the Santuri appears to be the only thing that Zorbas carries with him. In that same chapter, the first chapter of the novel, we also hear for the first time about Stavridakis, the narrator boss's friend who has gone to the mission in the Caucasus. But unlike in the case of Zorbas, in the case of Stavridakis, we have to wait until the end of the novel in order to learn, in an indirect way, about his place of origin. Interestingly, this happens through a reference to another instrument, the Cretan lyra. When Stavridakis was a baby, his old grandfather had held him on one knee and placed on the other the Cretan lyra and played tunes worthy of brave men, andristikous skopous. This is what the narrator boss had once said, proposing a toast to his friend Stavridakis, a Cretan, as we now learn at the end of the book. As for the place of origin of the narrator boss himself, what we have is a handful of indirect references, all extremely vague, and only 3 direct references, which appear, moreover, to be disconnected from the rest of the narrative. The first direct reference is found as late as in the 4th chapter, where we learn that the narrator boss's grandfather on his mother's side was from a Cretan village. The second direct reference, a little after the middle of the novel, comes when the narrator boss asks Zorbas to play the Santuri, and this is the dialogue. A Macedonian song of your own homeland, Zorba, I said. It's the narrator. A Cretan song of your homeland, said Zorba. The third and last reference, almost at the end of the novel, is the lengthiest of the 3, and comes when the narrator boss intervenes in a row between Zorbas and Kapitan Manolakas. He says to the latter, "And don't forget, Zorba is a foreigner, a Macedonian, and is the greatest disgrace we Cretans can bring on ourselves to raise a hand against a guest in our land." But apart from these 3 references, in the rest of the novel, it is extremely difficult even to guess that Crete might be the narrator boss's native island. Arguably, this ambiguity made it easy for Kakoyannis to transform the boss in his film into a half-English, half-Greek writer raised in England. Literature on Zorba the Greek has dealt with the question of why Kazantzakis placed the novel in Crete. Kazantzakis seems to have been thinking at first of placing the novel in different areas where he met and worked with a real Zorbas. But in the end, he decided to situate his story in one place, Crete. Already in the prologue to the novel, we are told of the seashore on Crete where the narrator spent a few months in the company of Zorbas. And the first chapter of the novel opens with the following phrases of the narrator. "I first met him in Piraeus. I wanted to take a boat for Crete and had gone down to the port." I would like to suggest that the question why on Crete acquires further significance if linked with that of the Cretan identity of the narrator boss. For if we take this into account, then the narrator boss's journey from Piraeus to Crete becomes a journey of return to his native land, that is, a nostos, of which, however, we don't hear anything in the novel. What we do hear is that the intellectual narrator boss was eventually connected through his friendship with Zorbas with the soil. "O earth, I am your last born, I'm sucking at your breast and will not let go. I had a tight grip on the mother's breast and I was sucking at it." But the earth, or mother, both written with capital letters, is described in general terms without any indication that it is the narrator's own Cretan earth or mother. This is almost at the end of the book. The first long reference to Crete in the novel is telling. When the two men, the narrator Bos and Zorbas, arrive there in the second chapter of the book, this arrival is presented as a return by Zorbas to a place where he had fought for freedom. It is through his eyes that we see the Cretan revolt of 1896 and the arrival of Prince George in Crete in 1898. We even hear Zorbas asking the narrator Bos, Jana, I don't know what happened here. Again. Okay. Okay. Have you ever seen a whole people gone mad because they have seen their liberty? This is Zorbas to the narrator Bos. No, our Bos, then blind you were born and blind you will die. The difference between Zorba the Greek and the report to Greco concerning the treatment of the Cretan identity of each novel's narrator is striking. For example, in the report, in the chapters devoted to the narrator Kazantzakis' childhood and adolescence on Crete, the arrival of Prince George on the island in 1898 is described at length as one of the two supreme lives in his life. Moreover, every time the narrator Kazantzakis returns to Crete, this is described as a sort of reunion with his native Cretan soil. There are three major returns in the report, with the last one marking the final phase of the ascent of the narrator's life towards its summit, what Kazantzakis calls the Cretan glance. The narrator Kazantzakis, in the report, announces this return, the last major return, with the words, "And immediately I turned my face towards Crete. I wanted to tread her soil and touch her mountains again in order to gain strength." It is in these chapters of the report that we are told how the narrator Kazantzakis met Alexis Zorbas for the first time, not in Piraeus, but on Crete. Having just returned to Crete, I made the acquaintance of an elderly mine worker named Alexis Zorba. Moreover, unlike in Zorba the Greek, in the report, the narrator Kazantzakis does not leave Crete after the failure of the mining venture. And it is on Crete, and not on Aegina, as in Zorba the Greek, that the narrator Kazantzakis is told of Zorbas' death and manages to transubstantiate, eventually dance to Logos, after having found the secret of Crete hidden in its soil. A number of questions arise. Could we see the revisiting of the encounter between the narrator Kazantzakis and Zorbas in the report to Greco as a sort of impressive restoration, as it were, or development of the theme of Nostos, which in Zorba the Greek was not touched on? Or might we consider the three references to the Cretan identity of the narrator Bos in Zorba the Greek to be only a sort of Theognidian seal? That is, did Kazantzakis only want to leave in the novel a signature about his authorial identity, I am a Cretan, while imprinting on the reader the image of the narrator Bos as above all and more generally a Greek writer? What seems certain is that the lack of connection in Zorba the Greek of the three references to the Cretan identity of the narrator Bos from the rest of the narrative does not seem to affect our perception and evaluation of the novel. For example, our view of Zorba the Greek as a great novel or not. Personally, I believe it is a great novel. The answer to these questions lies in what might be called Kazantzakis' narrative idiom. I will touch on this issue, focusing on three passages or episodes, all linked closely but not always in a straightforward manner, with the theme of music. The first episode is found in the penultimate chapter of the book and is precisely the scene in which Zorbas teaches the narrator Bos how to dance. That is, he teaches him his language, as he says. And this is the last scene in Kakoyannis' film with the famous Sertaki. In the novel, after dancing with the narrator Bos, Zorbas also dances alone, as he does in other points in the novel as well. This is the famous passage. Bos, he said, I have dozens of things to say to you. I've never loved anyone as much before. I've hundreds of things to say, but my tongue just can't manage them. So I will dance them to you. Here goes. He leaped into the air, and his feet and arms seemed to sprout wings. It is important to pay attention to the role of sound in this scene, or its soundscape, especially since the effect of Theodorakis' music in Kakoyannis' film is more than powerful. For in Kazantzakis' novel, the scene unfolds against a silent background. We don't have any reference to sound. And it is this silence that magnifies as a sort of sound box the wild music of Zorbas' body as he transubstantiates the rhythm of the earth into his own language, logos. Moreover, unlike in the film, in the novel, this is not the last time we see Zorbas and the narrator Bos on the Cretan seashore. During the last night they spent together, which is described in the final chapter of the book, Zorbas did not dance, but he sang. Suddenly, Zorba gave a wild, despairing cry, and immediately the cry canalized itself into Turkish words, and from the depths of Zorba's being rose an old monotonal melody full of passion, sadness, and solitude. Zorbas had just refused to play the santuri, as the narrator Bos had asked him to. Haven't I already told you, Bos? The santuri needs a happy heart. I'll play in a month's, perhaps 2 months or 2 years' time. How can I tell? Then I will sing about how two people separate forever. Previously in the novel, we have seen Zorbas playing the santuri. Remember the episode when he told the narrator Bos that he would play a Cretan song of your homeland. The role of the santuri in the novel is important, as is evident from the description of the first meeting between the narrator Bos and Zorbas in Piraeus, until the very end of the book, where we are told of Zorbas' wish to leave, after his death, his santuri to the narrator Bos. And in fact, santuri is the last word of the novel. This word seems to have for Kazantzakis much richer connotations than the word kanonaki. For most probably, this is the instrument Zorbas plays. The santuri is an instrument whose strings are struck with small hammers and not plucked with the fingers, as Zorbas does in the novel. But these details aside, both instruments bear strong Eastern connections, and this is also important concerning the philosophical analysis of the novel, especially in relation to the Dionysiac element. In Nietzsche, the Dionysiac element is connected with music, that is, die Musik as conceived of within the Western musical context. But in Kazantzakis' novel, through the santuri and the Turkish song, Zorbas' music is undeniably Eastern, thus making clear the fusion of West and East that Kazantzakis seems to consider quintessentially Greek. Moreover, to return to the last night the narrator Bos and Zorbas spent together, this scene as well unfolds against a silent background, like Zorbas' last dance. This time, the silent nocturnal background magnifies Zorbas' wild, despairing cry or scream. Kravyi is the word used by Kazantzakis, a key word in his universe. I will close by paying attention to a small detail. During the voyage from Piraeus to Crete, described in chapter 2 of the novel, Zorbas pointed out 2 dolphins leaping through the water alongside the ship. It is at this point that the narrator Bos noticed that almost half of the index finger of Zorbas' left hand was missing. The explanation given by Zorbas is that working once as a potter, he chopped his finger off because it got in his way as he was modeling a piece of pottery. Undeniably, this is one of the most representative examples of Zorbas' folly. But it is also worth asking, how did Zorbas play the Santuri or the Kanonaki with the missing finger, his missing index? Suffice it to bring to mind a player of the Santuri or Kanonaki to see that this is not a trivial question, and it is certainly a poignant image to have this with missing index finger. But Kazantzakis does not seem to bother either to pose or to answer the question. In fact, in the rest of the narrative, when we see Zorbas playing his Santuri, we simply forget his missing finger, in the same way that apart from the 3 direct references to it, we forget that the narrator boss is a Cretan. Such questions are pertinent to a realistic approach, and Kazantzakis' novel is, in an idiosyncratic way, not a realistic one. But what is it? Many suggestions have been made about Kazantzakis' narrative idiom and the question of his modernism. I would only like to mention expressionism, with which Kazantzakis was familiar in its various forms and media, as he was also with Russian avant-garde. I suggest that the question of expressionism and German modernism, more generally, is important not only for approaching Kazantzakis' work as such, but also for approaching his relationship to the so-called generation of the 30s. It also relates the question about Kazantzakis' reception in Greece to the difficulties encountered in Greece by other Greek artists with a special and acknowledged relationship to German modernism. For example, the painter Yorgos Bouzianis or the composer Nikos Skalkotas. In all these cases, apart from personal enmities which undeniably existed, there was also a wider cultural context, and it seems worth looking at this context beyond the myths created either by Kazantzakis or his enemies. But that is another theme for investigation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Polina.